Hi. As if we didn't have enough going on, word now that probably Russia is deep, deep, deep into American computer networks, federal government networks, Fortune 500 networks, the network that controls our nuclear security, the Energy Department that's all over the nuclear program, the Treasury Department, on and on and on. We don't even know the boundaries of this thing at this moment. And then they've been there, the Russians, if it's the Russians, have been there for 9 months. That they came in surreptitiously through a download, software upload, download that was sent out from a company that does services for the federal government and many Fortune 500 companies, and that piggybacked on that into the heart of their secure operations and are living there now, controlling, manipulating networks, and we don't know what kind of data manipulated at this point, with the capacity to do much more that we don't even know what's happened already. And so far, it appears to be a matter of surveillance and intelligence gathering, but we don't know that for sure either, and it wouldn't have to stay at that level. It could become active interference in electrical grids, you name it. Our nukes, I don't know. It's a terrifying story. Dick Durbin today called it a virtual declaration of war, what's going on here. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which Chris Krebs famously left a month ago, saying that he couldn't go along with President Trump's depictions of fraud in the US election, that they were the safest in American history. They are now saying that the federal government is at grave risk because of this gigantic hack, a hack of untold proportions, but what's told already is vast. The Pentagon today has stopped briefing the Biden transition team on their way into the White House and control of the US Defense Department. Weird timing, coincidental timing, I don't know. But here we are, a gigantic hack. It can feel like this country is now some kind of strange zombie walking around feeling like we're in control, but in fact, with a Russian cyber hand inside the glove of the federal government and many of our biggest corporations. We're going to look at all of this today with a terrific observer and more of cyber and security in this country and globally. Bruce Schneier is with us. He calls himself a public interest technologist, a security guru of the highest order. He's a fellow with the Berkman-Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, lectures at the Harvard Kennedy School on security issues. He's on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's got a newsletter on cyber and security issues that goes out to 250,000 readers. This is who the experts turn to when they want to understand what's going on. And we're going to bring him in right now, see what he can tell us. Bruce Schneier, please join us. Bruce Schneier joining us right now. It's unbelievable what we're looking at, and we want to understand it better. Here comes Bruce, and we're really glad to have you. Bruce, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sure you've heard the telling that we've all read and heard in the popular press. Probably Russia, almost certainly, or most certainly likely Russia, came in through an upload that went out all over the place, piggybacking in, and is now inside with its hand in all kinds of very sensitive cyber operations and networks. Just at the top level, does that popular story jive with what you see here, Bruce? Is that what this looks like to you?
That's basically correct. We don't know it's Russia. It's presumed to be Russia. It probably is. FireEye would not say that if they didn't have good evidence. US government has not officially attributed the attack. And yes, the initial attack vector, and I stress initial, was a malicious update to a SolarWinds network management package.
And what is SolarWinds, Bruce? What is SolarWinds?
It doesn't. The details don't matter. It's a piece of software that large networks use to help administer themselves, and it is very popular. Until a few days ago, the company had a list of their customers up on their webpage. If you want it now, you go to the Wayback Machine where there's a copy. and tens of thousands of customers. All of them seem to have gotten, most of them seem to have gotten and installed this malicious update. That doesn't mean the attacker went into all those networks. It just means they were able to. And then the attacker, again, presumably Russia, went into various networks. Microsoft announced that they found 40 different networks, most in the US, some outside the US.
Corporate networks, these.
Corporate networks and government networks.
Yeah.
Right. This package is used by many branches of the U.S. military, and it seems that the attacker was in those networks. And once you're in, you do other things. So the attacker, any sophisticated attacker, will bring in additional tools, will move laterally, will establish ways to get back in if their initial access is lost. So you should presume that any network that is using this SolarWinds system that downloaded that update, which should have been all of them, it needs to really burn themselves to the ground and start over from scratch. Now, I don't mean buy new hardware, but when the worst thing happens to your computer and you rebuild your operating system from the way you got it from the factory, that is what any good network administrator is going to be spending Christmas doing, as awful as that sounds, because there is no other way.
And many months beyond that, from what I'm reading here,
it depends on the network. So the analogy I'll use: you have a home, or better yet, a mansion or a large building, and there's an axe murderer in the building, and the window they broke into. If you patch the window, are you now safe? Well, kind of no. You go through the building room by room, looking under every bed, in every closet, to make sure that the attacker is gone.
And this is not a crude attacker. This is the SVU. This is the successor to the KGB. This is one of the most sophisticated attackers in the world. If they're there, they can be extremely subtle in their presence.
That's right. And likely they are. I mean, if the NSA did this, they would embed themselves really deeply. And we saw from Snowden some really phenomenal tools that the NSA can use to embed themselves in networks, in computers. And, you have to assume the Russians are at least as sophisticated. So yes, this is a major, major attack. Now, there are other vectors. The NSA put out a bulletin yesterday outlining how the attacker was bypassing authentication mechanisms to get into cloud systems. So this is a follow-on technique that the attackers used once they broke into your network. And this one of them involved VMware, another one involved some other system. So there's any number of exploits, vulnerabilities being used here. This is a major operation. And yes, this is a problem.
They're really deep in there. As administrators go in to try and fix this, they will or could, in effect, be watching. They'll be watching what's happening in real time, right?
And now you can only be deep in a few places. So the initial vector means that tens of thousands, I forget the number, and SolarWinds has mentioned the number of networks that have downloaded this patch. I forget the number. It's in the tens of thousands. It doesn't mean the attackers, the Russians, are in tens of thousands of networks. Right? Because going in and establishing that presence and watching is a manual operation. So they're going to pick and choose, right? DoD first. I don't know. Right? We know the company that makes apparel last.
Right.
That's uninteresting.
I saw the number is 18,000.
Okay.
We heard first about the Treasury Department, big deal. About the Defense Department, they say no. They say they're fine, but I'm reading here that savvy cyber people say we really doubt the Defense Department is fine.
Defense Department is most unlikely to be fine.
Right, and then the Russians are smart, and they've been watching for years. They know what they want. They know where it is. So it will be the most important government agencies, including energy and nuclear security, which we're told have been
so
accessed.
As far as we know, this is only unclassified networks. Now, that's a consolation, but not a big one. So classified things seem to be still secure. All right, so I found the page from SolarWinds. They have more than 300,000 customers worldwide, including more than 425 of the Fortune 500. all 10 of the top 10 US telcos, all branches of the military, Pentagon, State Department, NASA, NSA, Postal Service, NOAA, Department of Justice, and the president. All of the top accounting firms, hundreds of universities and colleges worldwide. They bragged about that last week. Now they kind of hide that.
And we're told one of the major targets in the private sector would have been security companies, cyber security companies.
So this is how it is found. And so FireEye last week found that a lot of their attack tools were breached.
And FireEye is a major sort of cyber defense, cybersecurity company.
So they're a big cybersecurity company. So as part of their internal audit of, how did the attackers, we don't know who, get our tools and steal them, they went through all of their code, all of their networks, and found this malicious update. And once they found it, they can trace it back to where it came from and then try to start figuring out who else had it, which leads me to a very interesting question. Why did FireEye do this? This hack seemed to have happened in April or March.
Yes.
Has there been no government audit of their network security on that scale since then? That feels kind of sloppy.
I've got a million questions on how we got here. But let's stick with where we are for just a moment, because I mean, even for a layman like me, this is mind-blowing. You went through that list, just sort of top line of who SolarWinds supplies. We can presume that the most important of all those, and you're naming the top US federal agencies, are penetrated. The federal government itself is saying that it itself is in grave risk. That's not a phrase that is rolled out casually. I mean, as we sit here right now, are we a kind of zombie country? Is the United States in control? I mean, we know that this country runs on computer networks now. Our communications, the trustworthiness of those communications, all kinds of controls, they all go out on networks. Are we in control of our own country at this moment? Can we say that with certainty?
So I think yes. I mean, I wouldn't. I think that's a bit of hyperbole. I mean, so.
But how do we know?
Attacking these networks. Agreed. If you're attacking these networks, there are several things you can do with them. So you can eavesdrop on them, right? And let's just listen to what's going on. So we have to presume that the attacker, again, presumably the Russians, are eavesdropping on the important things. Again, nothing classified, but everything unclassified. Two, you can change stuff, right? So we know that, the Russians have done influence operations, 2016 election, the hacking, the DNC. They did the same thing in France later, and they selectively modified documents that they released, right? So that's sort of another step. So you can imagine. I send
you an email that says, "Don't fire that missile," and when you get it says, "Fire that missile."
Right, or more likely the coordinates of where it's going to land are slightly off to the left, so everything misses its target. I mean,
that's a pretty big deal when we're talking nuclear weapon. The
more subtle you are in this, the more likely you get away with it. Right? You don't do a major change like all bank balances are zero, but no one's going to believe that.
Yeah.
You make minor adjustments.
Yeah.
So an attacker can do that. They can selectively degrade performance. Now these are offensive actions. The U.S. considers these acts of war. It does not consider this espionage an act of war. In fact, this is something that the United States does all the time. We're the world leader in these sorts of things.
But where's the line? Right. Where's the line between espionage and war? Dick Durbin.
The line is very explicit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we have terms for them. So CNE, computer network exploitation. That means we go in there, we take copies of everything. That's the NSA term for it.
Mm-hmm.
Then this CNA, computer network attack. We go in there and we change data, we delete data, we turn stuff off. That's the line. It is a very explicit line. And as far as we know,
steal data, it's espionage. Actively change and get in there and muck with it, it's war.
Right. So here's the thing that's interesting. This has been true for decades, but it used to be that stealing data was passive. Right? You'd have a receiver, you'd listen to their microwave transmissions, you'd listen into their radio transmissions, you'd tap under an undersea cable and listen to the traffic as it went back and forth. It was totally passive. Nowadays, the difference between CNA and CNE is one keystroke, right? Copy ***, or delete star dot star.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be that they were very separate sorts of things, and you couldn't confuse them. Now, the capability to do one gives you the capability to do both. Now, if the Russians are in our networks deeply enough to read everything, they can just as easily delete everything. And with some more work, change things.
I'm trying to get my head around the significance of this. You used the word hyperbole a few minutes ago. We don't want to go there. On the other hand, lately, I'm sort of sick of being told everything's okay with our politics, with our economy, with it, and then it's not okay.
Right.
3 days ago, we were told by silence that our networks were safe because no one said otherwise, and we presume that we have a capable, competent government looking over these things. We're sitting here tonight saying not only they're not safe, the entire federal government is at grave risk. That's the federal government's own depiction. So I think it's important for people to understand the depth of vulnerability that this can produce. Now, people are already talking in Washington about, taking a pound of flesh from Russia in return, about some kind of equal return hit on Russia. So maybe they're lying low tonight, but will they be lying low in a month? Will they be lying low next week? Will we know when they've done something? I mean, the potential import of this, given that it's just a matter of keystrokes difference between snooping and starting a cyber war, which can easily become a real war. These are very subtle distinctions. If you're at risk here, you're at risk, whether they act on it or not.
And that's right. And this is an enormous risk. And we definitely are at risk. So remember the Office of Personnel Management breach?
Yes.
In 2015.
They stole the personnel records of a gazillion people.
Of everybody with a security clearance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a massive intelligence coup. This was believed to be China. And, there were congressional hearings after that where people were very careful to say that, this is legit. We should have protected ourselves, but, good on China. I mean, there's no foul here. This is the way the game is played. And the question I think we need to ask is, maybe we need to start demanding that the game be played differently. And that has two parts, right? That's, making sure Russia doesn't do that to us through any kind of international pressure, and also ourselves restraining from doing the same thing to them. Because right now the difference between the Russia and the U.S. is Russia got caught.
Well, we had David Sanger on a month ago in advance of the election, looking at potential cyber attacks there. He reminded us, as David does, that the U.S. was the first country to go active with this when we intervened to throw off the centrifuges in Iran.
That's right.
And destroy much of their nuclear weaponry program,
Right.
nuclear program at that time.
And that is CNA, that is computer network attack. If that was done to us, we would retaliate probably. Russia did that to Ukraine twice, I forget the years, attacking their power grid and shutting power off to the capital for some number of hours.
People have said that was a trial run for what could be done anywhere else, most specifically the United States.
And certainly true. We do know that the Russians have been attempting to, don't know a lot of details, to penetrate the U.S. power grid. And certainly the United States is penetrating Russian power grid. So you have a very unstable situation. Countries are laying the groundwork for these attacks. There's a lot of ignorance about who's capable of what, and that fuels arms races.
And it fuels speculation because now we don't know. And this seems to be a Russian specialty. It's fueling uncertainty, whether it's foremost in our politics, in our cultural cohesion,
right?
Now in the operations of government and private industry as well. And I looked not at Solarwinds' website, but at your website today, where you've been reporting on this. And your comment section, and of course, when you get into cyber and hacks, you get into all kinds of speculation in a hurry. But your comment section is full of people saying, among other things, this was an inside job. They don't really believe the cover story. They don't believe what we're being told. This couldn't have happened at SolarWinds. Somebody at SolarWinds had to help this, had to make this possible. So
we saw an article a couple of years ago. The SolarWinds password was something like SolarWinds 1, 2, 3?
Yes, I saw that today.
I mean, so had to be an inside job. Don't confuse malice with just sheer stupidity. Now, we don't know, and probably not, that default passwords a couple of years ago is probably fixed. But that speaks to a culture of not taking security really seriously inside that company. So you don't have to presume an insider. You don't need a conspiracy.
But how
you
do you
just need
slip
to
into
hack the company.
SolarWinds and piggyback onto one of their uploads to the core of the federal government and the Fortune 500?
You just do it.
But there must be
SolarWinds 1, 2, 3. Surely there must be what? Someone paying attention?
Yeah.
Someone with a better password?
Yeah.
Maybe there's not. And networks are hackable. Systems are hackable. I mean, this is an attack. It's really interesting. Instead of attacking the networks directly, you attack a piece of infrastructure the networks use. All right, so I'm going to secure my home against burglary.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but maybe there's an attack against, let's make this up, the guy who reads the power meter, who I let in because that's part of what I do. I mean, there are ways this works, and it's clever, and it's subtle, and it seems to be very powerful.
Again, the way is open here for all kinds of speculation, and we live in the great age of speculation. So it's not that I want to encourage this, but once they're inside, once they can muck with communications, they can change an email, change a message, they can look into all kinds of data. Here's somebody with AshbrookLIVE saying today, my guess is Russia's Sputnik vaccine for COVID-19 is stolen.
So that's possible. So we know that, aside from this, that several countries have targeted companies' vaccine research, and that has been an attack vector. So yes, that is certainly like
we don't know that pharmaceutical companies are immune to this.
We know they're not immune to this.
That would be an obvious.
They're not using any magic computers. They're using the same computers everyone else is using.
Yeah. So Russia might well have thought, hey, let's get in. Let's get in there quick because here comes COVID, and the U.S. is pretty good at this stuff. I mean, imagine.
Yeah, and other countries as well.
The failure, I mean, you say networks are vulnerable, and yet these networks, they're sort of like our national brain now. I mean, they're the operating system for the country. That would seem to be crucial defense priority. Mitt Romney is saying today, this is the equivalent of allowing cyber intruders into all these networks is the equivalent of Russian bombers flying over the country undetected. Like as if we were
so that's not a bad analogy, right? And during the Cold War, right, that kind of stuff happened pretty regularly. We would fly our spy planes over Russia, and there'd be a little cat and mouse game. Can we get them to turn on their radar so we know they're there? Can they detect us? And these are Cold War games, and yes. So right now there are no real rules in cyberspace. There are no norms. There are no rules, and countries are taking advantage of them, U.S. included. So it's a little hard for us to cast stones here because we do the same sorts of things. It's on us. We should defend ourselves better. And I think this exposes some problems with defense. We haven't even talked about the NSA paradigm of persistent engagement, defending forward. The idea being that instead of defending our networks, and I guess in addition to, we go into their networks and disrupt operations. And supposedly we disrupted something during the 2018 elections. We don't know the details, but we disrupted an operation either in progress or pending, and that was a success.
As a way of saying, don't muck with these.
Not as a way of saying, but as a way of preventing you from mucking with it, right? So I'm going in, your computers are about to launch the attack, and suddenly your computers don't work. I mean, and we did that. The Internet Research Agency, that troll farm in Russia, their computers stopped working in the advance of the election. So if we have this defend forward, persistent engagement, defend forward strategy, why didn't we detect this? This is a major operation that Russia's doing. It kind of shows a problem with that persistent engagement mentality if we did not detect this in progress.
Well, let's
think we should have.
Let's look at that two ways, looking backward and looking forward. First, backward. We know that, what was it, May of 2018, they fired the cybersecurity czar, the cybersecurity coordinator in the federal government, the Trump administration did. A year ago, the New York Times reported that there was an exodus of cybersecurity, talent from the federal government because they felt they were working in a hostile environment. The Trump administration did not support that activity. Viewers right now listening, a question for you. James says, is it coincidental that this happened during the final year of the Trump administration?
So it's a question. I don't know. I mean, my guess is probably. I mean,
really? Wait a minute. We're in a.
I know, but you have to imagine. Imagine Trump lost 4 years ago. Would Russia say, "Oh, I'm not going to attack the U.S. anymore"? No. So I think countries: U.S., Russia, China, UK, Iran, North Korea, to some extent France, Israel, are engaging in cyber operations pretty regularly on each other and countries I didn't name. And, as operations come into flower and get, done, these things happen. So my guess is it was largely a coincidence. I mean, the success of it, you might blame on, the lack of attention being paid to cybersecurity in the U.S. government. You could say that, and hopefully we'll figure that stuff out in the coming months.
I mean, I can't help but wonder, as Trump leaves and Vladimir Putin's apparent agenda has been bolstered in so many ways over time. And we all still remember that press conference in St. Petersburg when Trump stood next to him like an obedient puppy, kind of just mimicking whatever Putin said. Is it possible that the Trump administration defanged our cybersecurity operations? And I mean, this sounds paranoid, but I feel paranoid right now.
Okay, so we know that the Trump administration has gave the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command more leeway to conduct operations. So on the offensive side, they've given more capabilities to our agencies.
Okay.
On the defensive side, my guess is yes, that we spent less focus than we should have, and I think we're going to learn that in the coming months. And I also know about the culture of not taking security seriously. I mean, attack is fun, defense is boring.
But we spent billions and billions on defense, and here we are. We end up being naked. I want to ask you about the Chris Krebs, who left the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Now, to be fair, he was fired.
Was fired. Yes, to be accurate, he was fired, and has testified again just in the last week in support of his observation over the last month that this was the safest election in American history, in cyber terms certainly. But if and he's kind of in many quarters for millions of people, he's a national hero right now. But he was in charge of this. So is this on him in part?
Oh no, I mean, don't know. It's hard right now for me to know who has what authorities over what. And the NSA is in charge of DoD networks, in charge of classified networks. And we're going to learn, what I said earlier, who should have been conducting these audits that could have found this? Why did we have to wait for FireEye to figure it out? Couldn't we have figured it out ourselves? And I don't know who is responsible. That will be interesting.
Why would John Bolton come in under Donald Trump and drive out the so-called cybersecurity czar?
So beyond my pay grade.
I mean, on the face of it, okay, I get it's behind your pay grade, but it's pretty breathtaking when you see what we're now looking at.
You want my commentary? Stay into the tech, more in the tech, less in the politics, and I'm on safer ground.
Of course.
You do the politics when I leave.
Absolutely, but what we're talking about here is where those things meet, and that is a source of vulnerability for both, for our politics, because we're open to manipulation, and for our tech, because we've been put at grave risk, we're told. In the defense authorization bill that's before Congress right now, and that President Trump is threatening to veto, there are additional provisions for more active, what did you call it, persistent engagement?
The phrase is persistent engagement. Think of it as attack in the guise of defense.
Yes, it's they call it. There's something like hunters, like hunter
Right.
killers.
Defend forward is another phrase. I mean, these all seem like doublespeak to me.
There was this whole congressional solarium, they called it, in the last year or two.
So the Cybersecurity Solarium was a phenomenal group, and their report is well worth reading. And they have
Senator King was a
yep, and they have a list of recommendations of things we should do in the United States to improve cybersecurity. And we would be a better country if we just like took the list, walked into Congress, and passed this, and it all became law. It's full of great recommendations.
Some of those are in this defense authorization bill that's still waiting for the vote right now, and it's under threat of veto from President Trump, including the sort of forward, unleash the hounds to go forward and disrupt actively. That's in there. And the president's still threatening a veto of the whole bill. Now, there are other things he wants in there, but it seems to me another sign of, I don't know what to call it, this sort of resistance to full on.
Yeah, but it's not, right? I mean, the battles are not about the issues. They're about what you said, the little side things people want. So, right, as a cybersecurity expert, that's politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish it was better, but I have no more insight than any other random person.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, there it is. These are means, you said the Solarium is pretty great, and their recommendations are not implemented at this point, many of them.
Almost all of them are not. I'm part of the Aspen Cybersecurity Group, the Aspen Institute, one of the think tanks.
Yep.
We came up with a policy agenda for the next administration. And here are like 5 things that you should do. Again, it would be great if they were followed. We're not that optimistic. I mean, this stuff is, politics is pretty dysfunctional. And getting anything done is actually hard.
More of the kind of questions that came up today, and again, this is a layman's question about what's possible here. A commenter saying, are the Russians in there cleaning up? If they're in all these networks, are they cleaning up Trump's communications so that?
Yeah, probably not. See, I mean, my guess is no. What do they care? I mean, they're doing what you do when you attack. Sorry, when you do these kinds of operations, you get in. You move laterally to get elsewhere in the network. You establish persistence so that when your initial way in goes away, you can still get in. You lie in wait because when you're stealthy, you can be there the longest, and you listen. And you don't do any modifications unless you absolutely have to. You keep it in your back pocket in case of hostilities, in case something really matters. I mean, that's what you do. That's what nations do.
But you're not inactive. You're watching, you're listening, you're learning.
Right. You're not inactive, but you're not offensive.
Mm-hmm.
You are active because you're on their computer. You're watching, you're listening, you're learning. But you're not really changing. You change something, that's really risky. I mean, someone finds out, you said fire the missile and the email said didn't fire the missile. What the hell happened? And suddenly we start looking. And then you lose your access. So you want to keep your access as long as possible.
But you don't have to actively do something in order to change the world.
That is exactly right. Knowledge is power, and that's why espionage is, a sport that nations have conducted on each other since nations existed.
So you listen, and suddenly Russia announces its Sputnik vaccine before Pfizer announces its vaccine, or you've got
but this is ancient, right? The Russian space shuttle looks like the U.S. space shuttle. Russian fighter planes look like U.S. fighter planes. I mean, this stuff isn't new. This happens again and again and again.
Yeah. More questions here. Dan says, we seem kind of inured by story after story on consumer data hacks. What Americans really care, or will Americans really care or care to care about this story?
It's a good question. And the answer, of course, is going to be not really. That this will be in the news. Next week, something else will be in the news. And this is the world we live in. It's not just cybersecurity. It's pretty much everything. That, there are so many things happening, and we can only focus on a few of them. So, no. I mean, cybersecurity has never been a campaign issue. Data privacy has never been a campaign issue. Internet of Things security, consumer, national. These aren't campaigns. They don't come up in presidential debates. I mean, these are things that are important, but they're not things that voters, us, care about to the degree that that politicians make statements about them.
I mean, a few years ago, I might have felt the same way, with this sort of sense that the status quo was pretty steady. The United States was in a pretty strong position globally. Our democracy was pretty healthy. Our economy was recovering, decently healthy. That we would go forward sort of in a status quo way, for better or worse. Lately, I'm not so sure about that. We see things coming undone on multiple fronts. The degree of political corrosion that we've seen with apparent Russian interference or support of that corrosion is quite stunning lately. I mean, I sometimes worry about us being in something that's not just the same old, but that we're approaching not an end game necessarily, but a time when the American society, economy, infrastructure becomes vulnerable to being rocked in a more substantive way.
So I think these are important things to talk about. This is not my area. Lots of people write really smart things about misinformation and propaganda and how it moves in today's society, how the current mix of tech and partisanness interplay. There's a lot of stuff here. It's nothing I do, but it is well worth, reading some of the good stuff on this. And it's a lot of actors. It's not just Russia.
But
and it's not even nation states. Like the thing about the Russian attacks in the elections of 2016 is not that Russia attacked the election, is that like I could have afforded it. It was like pretty cheap. And that's the ecosystem of Facebook and Google and the internet and all of those mechanisms of persuasion that we've built the internet on. We've built the internet on personalized advertising, on manipulation.
But your expertise, Bruce, is now hyper adjacent to all of these political, and it's not just political vulnerabilities, right? We could be talking active defense vulnerabilities here. It does strike me that it is today that the Pentagon has stopped briefing the Biden transition team. I don't know why. Do they not want to talk about what's going on with all of this suddenly exposed network breach? I don't know.
I have no knowledge other than any other random person. Again, so not my area.
It feels like this is just going to be left in the lap of the Biden administration when they come in. I'm really curious about
this. Is something that new administration will have to deal with. Whether it is establishing new norms about cyberspace, figuring out, where the U.S. defenses failed, why and how. I think it's really important. Why did the NSA not pick this up in their precision engagement, defend forward, listening to what the people attacking us are doing? I mean, these are going to be important conversations to have. The new administration is going to have to deal with this and sort of figure out, where do we go from here? How do we clean up? I mean, can we actually burn all of the government networks to the ground and rebuild them? That is not cheap. Right? That is not easy. Now, I joked and said it's going to ruin everybody's Christmas, and you were right to say, and many weeks and months later. I mean, this is a major security breach that will require an enormous amount of cleaning up.
People are talking about potentially years. I wonder, since they are and will be actively watching as the U.S. tries to clean this up, is this a kind of, this goes to the sort of Russian meme, but is this a kind of chess game where we take a step to clean up and they
of course
quietly?
I mean, it's exactly what it is. And remember, and there's many boards, because remember, we're attacking their networks. When they discover the NSA and their networks, they don't announce it. So it's a chess game. It's multiple chess games, and most of them are invisible to us in the unclassified world. So we don't know anything that's been happening behind the scenes elsewhere. What other operations the U.S. has disrupted? I mentioned 2018. We disrupted some operations involving the election. Did we do that this year? I have no idea. Are we attacking them? I mean, was there a major attack from the United States against Russia last year that they're retaliating for? I have no clue.
Who's better at this? The Russians, the Americans, the Chinese, the Iranians? Who's top dog when it comes
All right,
to this kind of...
so imagine it's a giant race, and everyone's running it, and it's in pitch darkness, and you can't see anything. Who's better? You have no idea. The US, we know, spends more money on this than anybody else, probably than everybody else. So, back 2 decades ago, the United States was the master at international espionage. For a bunch of reasons, largely still true. Right? A lot of the traffic comes through the US. If there's an email from Russia to Japan, it likely goes through the servers in the United States. Kind of weird. That's the way the internet's built. And we eavesdrop on those. Most of the companies are American companies, so we have influence on those. And we have international agreements and ability to see around the globe in ways other countries don't. My guess is the United States is still the best at the offense. Right? Clearly, we're not great at defense, but at eavesdropping and potentially doing CNA, the attack, I would bet that the United States is still a leader in this. The question really to ask is, does that serve us well? Because by allowing for a network where attacks are easier, we have an advantage. But because we are so dependent on the networks, we have a vulnerability. And there are political thinkers like Jason Healy who say we need to adopt a defense-dominant strategy. That yes, we have this advantage of an attack. We need to give it up. We need to ensure that these systems are secure, even though it secures our enemies as well, because securing us is that important. That this balancing attack and defense needs to be defense dominant, and we're not doing that.
If we play the cowboy, others will play the cowboy. If we're,
it's more that if we have regulations or rules or subsidies or something to ensure that Solarwinds update system is secure against hacking, then we're safer, but so are all the countries who use that. I mean, I guarantee you that right now, as the NSA is cleaning up US networks, they're using this vulnerability to attack foreign networks. I mean, if they're not, I would fire someone and replace them with a smarter operations guy. If and I'm just making this up, that the Chinese government uses SolarWinds as well, you better hack that. You better hack that Monday, because you don't know when they're going to clean it up. Get in there, establish persistence. That's what we do.
You mean you're guessing that having discovered this vulnerability in the SolarWinds, that the US would have jumped right on it and tried to use the same vulnerability as well?
Odds are close to zero we wouldn't. I mean, we're not that stupid. Of course we would.
It's kind of mind-blowing. It's like everybody's in everybody else's business, and yet
that's the way the world works, and that is mind-blowing. And that's what we need to slowly change.
What should Snowden be brought home, forgiven and brought home? He pointed out how we were playing the cowboy all over the place.
I believe that what Snowden did was valid whistleblowing, and that yes, he should be allowed home. It's likely not going to happen for a bunch more years. I mean, he betrayed his cohort, and people are personally betrayed by him. And until they retire and new people come on board who aren't personally betrayed, I think nothing's going to happen.
He's a pretty young guy. That could be a long wait.
Could be a long wait.
Assange, good player, bad actor?
I was more of a fan of Assange when he had a philosophy of radical transparency. I could argue with it, but it was a reasonable transparency. When he started being a Russian tool, I stopped having sympathy for him.
Turning to defense over offense, given how slippery this world is that really an option? I mean, earlier you were saying they have a philosophy of persistent engagement, or forward pushing, or whatever you want to call it, because that's part of a defense. The best defense is a good offense. In the slippery, subtle, nuanced, penetrable world of the digital, can you really go just for defense, or does that leave you like France with this Maginot Line and you're screwed?
No, you could do a lot more, and there are many principles. Brad Smith at Microsoft has been pushing a Geneva Convention for cyberspace. What's off limits? There's a Paris Agreement. I mean, none of these are binding. UN has produced agreements and principles on what's allowed and what isn't. So yeah, a lot of smart thinkers are looking at how you would prioritize defense. I mean, of course, you have to have offensive capability, but it really is the balance. And right now, we tend to push that balance much more on offense. I read it, and I looked for the stat just before this this call. I couldn't find it. So, look for it before you repeat it. But we have spent like 40 times on offense in cyberspace that we spend on defense. Now, if it's not 40 to 1, it's going to be some number like that. We spend a lot more on offense than defense. If we flip that, we would be a lot safer.
Can we see the payoff from all that digital offensive effort?
I think we
Cyber
cannot.
offense?
Right when you mentioned the attack against the Iranian nuclear program, I mean, occasionally something comes into public, but most of it's espionage, most of it's classified, and we don't see the payoff.
I mean, if the best defense is a good offense, and
that's actually not true. The best defense is a good defense. The best offense is a good offense.
But I was just about to say, we're leaning so heavily into offense, and here we've been hacked right down to our bones for the last 9 months, and it's still going on right now as we speak.
And that's worth figuring out why that happened. I mean, who fell down on the job, how and why, and how do we do better? I mean, I want to see an enormous investigation because this is important.
You're really in the guts of this, or know the world that is. Is our digital security primarily tended to by government workers or by private contractors, or what's the balance?
Even worse. I mean, the answer to this. It's in private hands and private companies. So a lot of it's private contractors, but most of our infrastructure is in private hands. Right, our power grid, which is incredibly important to our national security, it's all private companies. Not even government contractors, private companies doing private stuff.
But
I mean, a lot of our infrastructure, hospitals, airlines, power grid, telecommunications network, most of our critical infrastructure is in private hands. That's the way the U.S. works, and that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that's so, but some power company in upstate New York versus the Russian government is not a fair fight.
But we've always been told that was the way to get efficiency and ultimately better products, better
services. That is the way to get efficiency and better products, but it might not be the way to get security.
We have enormous cybersecurity institutions within the federal government, within the U.S. government, with enormous payrolls. So that makes me ask again, I know many things are run, of course, by private industry in this country, all over the place, but in cybersecurity, is the bulk of it private or public? The
bulk of it is private.
Power.
So okay, that's hard actually. I mean, I don't know the answer. The NSA's got a classified budget, so it's hard to do some math here.
Yeah.
Right. The black budget's big,
but they've got tens of thousands of employees.
They got an enormous number of people. That's right. And but then job descriptions are classified. So there's a lot we don't know. But really think that most of our critical infrastructure is in public hands. It's public. It's corporations who are doing the things they do. It is not government. I mean, unlike China or Russia, where that barrier that between private and government is more fluid. Like a major company in China, is it government or is it a private? Well, it's kind of sort of both.
Is it, another question then, is it a matter of bulk effort where the more dollars and person hours you throw at it and computing power you throw at it, the more likely you are to succeed? Or in the end, does this boil down to a few geniuses sitting on each side, like the Kasparovs of each country sort of playing against each other?
It's some of each, but my guess is more of the former. That it's more of throwing the resources at it. I mean, it is going to, the geniuses matter, right? Breakthroughs come from geniuses, but a whole lot of advances come from putting in the time, putting in the effort, putting in the money. So my guess is it's more the former than lone geniuses.
Do you sleep all right with this level of vulnerability, and now vulnerability that's been exploited? Have you come, as somebody who knows about this stuff, to just accept this as the air we breathe now, that we make them vulnerable, they make us vulnerable?
I largely have, and it's sort of interesting that our systems are vulnerable. The computers we're on right now are vulnerable. We have antivirus, we keep our patches up to date, we try not to click on malicious links. But you know that there are vulnerabilities. There are vulnerabilities at the personal level, the corporate level, the national level. I have largely accepted this. Our current state of knowledge of computing is that we can't build totally secure systems. We don't know how. We don't have a theory. An attack is easier than defense for a whole bunch of reasons that would take, half an hour to list them all, but basically it is. And if you think about the history of warfare, that has been true, off and on. Someone invents a new weapon. Someone invents the rifle, and now attack is used in defense. And then someone, discovers trench warfare, and now defense is easier. And then the Germans invent blitzkrieg warfare, and now attack is easier. It just goes back and forth. But right now in cyberspace, attack is easier than defense. So it does not going to be true forever, but it is true right now.
Tom Bossert, who was national security advisor to President Trump, has written with maximal alarm in recent days about all this. And he says, among other things, that the U.S. it'll fall to Biden. He'll have to use, he says, U.S. resources to severely punish the Russians for.
I have trouble. I read that piece. It's New York Times. It's worth reading. I think I don't know how we can. How do we punish Russia for doing something we do ourselves? We could, but it really feels like hypocrisy. And maybe we just accept that we're going to be. It's going to be hypocrisy, and we do that.
We do it all the time. Rich guy cheats on taxes.
Okay, fair. But these are things the U.S. does. We don't do them in this way. I would like to think that we wouldn't compromise an entire product, that we tend to be more selective and more targeted in our operations. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to believe we are.
What do you mean by compromise a product?
So think, right, the SolarWinds product is compromised,
I see.
Right, which means every user is compromised. So, for example, one of the Snowden documents was a picture of NSA employees putting a backdoor in a Cisco router intended for the Syrian telephone company. So that's an operation we did, but we only affected that one router. Right? We took the physical box, opened it up, added stuff, sent it on its way. We didn't go into Cisco, attack and update so that every single Cisco user is vulnerable. So I like to think that we don't do that.
But a couple of minutes ago, you said once they realized SolarWinds was vulnerable, they'd be in there like kids in a candy store.
Of course. But they didn't do it. They'll take advantage of it. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
Yes, I mean, slim difference in some ways.
So these are all splitting hairs. And that's right. And I think that we should stop this hair splitting. You remember the debates about Chinese hacking, where we don't want them to engage in industrial espionage. And they said, well, you do it too. And we said, no. We don't spy on Chinese companies and give that information to U.S. competitors. We spy on Chinese companies and use that information in trade negotiations. And China said, that's not a difference. And we said, that's a big difference, right? Separation of government, of public and private. But it's not a difference they have in their country. So yes, this hair splitting gets complicated.
It feels to me, and correct me, Bruce, if I'm wrong, but you seem to be operating on a kind of presumption that there will be an ongoing equilibrium of offense, defense, interventions, that all these big actors are going to use this against each other all the time, but that kind of stasis ensues.
That seems to be what we have. I mean, my only hope that if there's actual war, that Russia's in all our networks, that we're also in all their networks, and nothing works. So yeah, my hope is there is some stasis and equilibrium in this. It is volatile because it is an arms race, and arms races are fueled by two things: fear and ignorance, and we have those two things here. So I'd like to dampen things down, but there is a weird stability. If Russia can watch everything we do, and we can watch everything Russia does, right? Nobody's surprised. It is now, people in international relations are much better than I on the geopolitics of this. But thinking about this I mean, it's a lot of wheels within wheels, and
Yeah.
the chess metaphor you used, I think, was really accurate.
I mean, another metaphor that comes to mind, I lived for a long time in Japan, and you watch a sumo match, and for a
Right,
long,
a lot
long
of
time,
maneuvering, and then suddenly 2 seconds it's over.
2 seconds, and someone's on their back and out of the ring, and they've lost. And that's what I wonder. Is there a moment, is there a conversation about that in the cybersecurity community
Yeah,
of
I don't know the answer to your question. It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
because again, it can sound paranoid, but I don't think it is right now. That Putin seems to be really playing with a lot of the world, and with the United States in particular. And in Trump, he's had what looks like some kind of dance partner, willing or blackmailed, or I don't know what, or just a doofus. But it's too consistent to be entirely that way. And in that environment, our footing feels to me much less secure than it did 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I agree with you. But my guess, the operation doesn't have anything to do with Trump, and would have happened anyway. But yes, I think Trump was less willing to push Russia pretty much on anything, and that did embolden them. We'll see. We'll see what happens now.
A new administration in just a little more than a month now, presumably with new attitudes, but they'll come in and they'll work with most of the same government infrastructure and most of the same private infrastructure. How much difference does leadership, let's say, starting at the White House, through the cabinet and down through these agencies, how much difference does it make in terms of tightening up?
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe a lot of it's resources. Establishing priorities and providing resources, and then making a culture of security, and a belief in all through the government that this is important, that it'll be rewarded, that we need to do it. And that comes from the top. The actual work comes from the bottom. But making this a priority, making defense a priority, comes from the top. The reason there weren't audits of these systems at the level that FireEye did to discover this is because they weren't in the budget. You put them in the budget and they happen. Maybe we discover these operations months earlier.
I'm going to let you go in a minute, but take us back to the micro for a moment. The nuance of those guys sitting at the Internet Research, whatever they call it, in St. Petersburg, or whoever, at the SVU, they were somewhere in Russia, presumably, working on this for years, months, I don't know, trying to figure out who's got a package we might slip into. Is it Solarwinds or somebody else? How might they have begun to sort of maneuver their way into access, into intimacy with a company like that, so that they'd be in position to piggyback on their upload? Did they have to go into someone's email chain?
So we know how this is done. It's credential stealing, right? And we know about phishing. So you get an email saying, click on this link, enter your password. One person does that in the company, and you can get into the company. Then when you're there, you figure out how to move laterally, right? The same thing you do when any attacker penetrates any network. They gain access somehow. Maybe there's a vulnerability that they exploit. Maybe they steal some credentials and they have to do some authentication attack. Then they move around, they figure out what's going on, they find the update server. Maybe the password's SolarWinds 123. Maybe they changed it to SolarWinds 123 star, right? They made it more secure. But they figure out how to get in, and then it's a matter of finding the right package that you can slip in your back door, and then you let the system take its course. The updated. You know this. You if you use Windows, every second Tuesday every month, you get an alert saying download your updates and patch your system, and you believe that will help. This is what happened there, but in that case, it didn't help.
Wow. On the day or night or whatever it was in Moscow or St. Petersburg or whatever, when they realized if it was in Russia, oh my God, we've just been uploaded to the entire federal government and most of the Fortune 500 in America, biggest coup in cyber attack history. How do you?
I hope someone got a bonus in their paycheck. Right. That'd be a pretty good day.
Vodka all round that night.
That'd be a pretty good day. And there is probably grudging admiration. We saw this with the China hack on the OPM. It was the DNI Clapper who said, you got to kind of admire an attack like that.
Man, it feels to me like somehow you're deep enough in this, you've seen enough of it that you sleep all right with it. But lately I find that I don't. Maybe I should, lay people like me are just awakened now and then when it's really big news and it's like.
And that's the thing of it. I think that's right. For most people, this is never news until once in a while it is. And when it is, it's a disaster. Right? I mean, those of us in this field, we see this stuff every day. I mean, not to this magnitude, but this kind of thing. I mean, it's not unprecedented. It's not surprising. This is the way attacks work.
Well, I'm going to be on record saying, to me, it feels like we're under a kind of attack that is multi-front and cumulative. And to add this very large digital advance of attack to it seems to me significant. I fear or feel that you could see this used in some way, subtle or not so subtle, at a moment of vulnerability. For us to be discovering this at the same time that we're in this really rocky, strange transition is doubly unsettling to me. And the fact that the Pentagon is not even briefing the Biden team now on transition, I mean, it only adds sort of layers of resonance around the warning bells that are, clanging at the back of my mind right now. You're good at being chill with this, Bruce. I'm not.
I got no alternative. I got to go down and eat dinner.
Okay, all right. Well, enjoy.
Right, I'm going to put my pants on the same way tomorrow as I did today.
I hope so, unless they've been digitally stitched inside out, and we're.
I do not buy smart pants. I'll tell you that right now.
All right, no smart pants. Bruce Schneier, it's wonderful talking with you. Thank you for your generosity of walking us through all this at a pretty alarming moment in this perpetual dance.
And thanks for engaging on the issue. I appreciate it.
Really great to be with you. Thanks a lot, Bruce.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Listeners all over, thank you very much for being with us. That was a lot of fun. See you again very soon. Stay safe. Use your updates and pray that they're not corrupted from St. Petersburg. Bye for now. AshbrookLIVE signing off.